Hello and welcome to Funded Futures. My name is Emily. Today I am joined by Will Richards, who is the co-founder of Overnight Success, which is a media publication that guides startups, founders, and helps them grow and scale, as well as running public relations at Encour. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
That was quite a mouthful for me, so if I stumbled over my words, please forgive me. I try my bloody best.
I'm someone who has too many jobs, I think.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think, but that's the thing, usually if it's a woman, you're like, how do you do it all? But you're a man, so I feel like it's fine, right?
Maybe. I don't think it's fine sometimes.
So if you talk about your journey to get to where you are now, how did you get involved in the startup space? You're quite involved in a lot of different facets of the startup ecosystem in Australia. Where did that begin and where did that passion really come from?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I can go back to when I was finishing university and I was working part-time at a car insurance startup. I didn't realize it was a startup. I just thought it was like kind of a job. And that team was really, really small and we, I was an early employee there and the business grew and then got acquired. And we sort of went through the exit with them. And then the same team restarted another car insurance company in digital car insurance and sort of did the whole thing again. So I kind of got exposed to the world of startups and being a little bit scrappy in a small team without sort of realizing it was a startup. And we weren't VC backed or anything like that. Like there was some external capital. So I think I got a bit of a taste for it there. And then left university fully and worked in sort of the world of finance, got involved in private equity and worked in childcare specifically. And the guy who I worked for was very entrepreneurial and had made a few angel investments early in his career and had a bit of success doing that. So he sort of gave me the task like I want to look at more startups. If you're able to sort of find some for us to look at, that'd be awesome. And it's just something you can do in like when you have some downtime. And I kind of just like got really interested in finding out more about what these technology companies were doing and realized there was a bit of a hub here in Melbourne of people building cool things. And kind of just went, I would love to get more and more involved in this. And I was spending less time doing like my actual job and more time doing this like side project.
Yeah, right.
Which I think is a pretty good sign for anyone who's at work when they sort of discover something they're really passionate about, like probably chase that feeling a little bit. And then I looked at learned about the world of VC and investing, and coming from that world of private equity, that was probably like the most natural transition. But then again, like it was extremely hard to get a job in VC. Like I would submit a resume and wouldn't hear anything back or get immediately no'd because it's pretty competitive. So I thought, how do I separate myself from the competition of similar people or even people much smarter than me? And thought, it's probably you want to sort of separate yourself and creating media is a really high leverage way of doing it. I didn't have the cash that some angel investors have where they can build their own name in the world of startups. So I thought if I can write about startups, add some value to the community, it'll be a good way to build a potentially positive reputation. So that's the launch of Overnight Success, and got a bit of support from the StartMate community when I started that project. And then 3 years on, I've sort of been involved at another family office doing some angel investment. And now I've joined sort of the world of PR, working with Jesse Will at Encour, helping startups sort of tell their story a bit better.
Jeez, it's a lot. And I think at the end of the day, that's a really inspiring story for people to want to get into it, because I was like you. I remember people would say, it's a startup. And then I think, Uber is a startup, right? And that's what I would go to. I didn't realize the actual terminology behind it and what a startup was. And now that I work at a startup, but we help startups, it's a really interesting thing.
Yeah, I think the term startup is like generally kind of like overused. Like I think people probably still talk about Canva to some extent of like, it's this like startup, like it's a corporate now, like it's just growing extremely fast and it's probably like a really awesome culture and great business, but it's probably no longer that startup status. I think I've always been drawn to like the much earlier stage side of things where there's probably a very small team, less than like 30 people. I think as well at Overnight Success, we identified that, there are other media actors in this, in the landscape that cover the startup ecosystem really well. And I think there's some great journalists out there that cover startups, but they can't cover all the startups. And, a lot of people really do care about the early stage stuff that's coming up because that's potentially something they can invest in or join as an employee. So we really focused on making sure we covered like every like every startup that raised capital or did something cool, which often meant like we were looking at pre-seed or angel rounds that other publications wouldn't cover. And I think that gave us a really nice reputation of someone who really cared about these up and comers and these like small companies doing cool things.
Right. So what would you say your definition of a startup is, and when do they graduate from being a startup to being a fully fledged company?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's getting harder and harder to sort of like guess when they, graduate from being, let's say, a startup. I think back in the day, you probably would have said when they IPO, but now companies are staying like private for much longer. Like is SpaceX a startup? Like probably not, but it's not a public company. I would love it to be. I think it's a funny one. I think when you start getting, a big executive team and, it becomes quite bureaucratic inside, I think it's probably like a bit of a culture shift.
Right.
I think a lot of these corporates would say though, like, oh, we have a startup mentality, which is fantastic. But I think what does
that even mean?
I know, like, we break
they have
things
a ping pong table in the boardroom or something? Is that
I guess so. Yeah, I guess so. It's a funny one. I think we probably put a finger up in the air a little bit and sort of, you sort of know if it's a startup or not. And that's, when we decide to write about it or when we don't decide to write about it.
So when you're kind of thinking about companies that you are going to cover, what do you look for?
I think a lot of people like reading about the latest deal that happened. So we always try and cover startups that raise capital. And this is a shout out for any founders who are looking to get coverage. Like you don't need to have a PR firm, even though I work for one. Like you don't need to have a press release. You can just message us and let us know that you've got some capital. We'd love to write about you. And it's a good way to get exposure in front of quite a few VCs these days. I think if they're sort of doing something that's like enabled through technology, that's probably something we're interested in.
Right.
We also don't just cover, like I'm fascinated by bootstrapping as well. And I think that's a really good way to go about it. So we also try and cover bootstrappers too. It's not just about VC capital.
Right. So obviously you've worked in, media and publications for a while now. What do you think the huge impact that generative AI has had on the media?
That's a good one.
Do you still write your own stuff?
I think yes, mostly. But we definitely use AI to support us. Like the overnight success team is Gemma and myself. We've got a developer coming on board because we're building a software platform that uses AI as well.
Oh, incredible.
But for a long time, it's just been Gemma and I writing. She also runs an agency. I've worked pretty much full time the whole time building this. Now I work 4 days a week. So getting that helping hand from AI is extremely valuable. That being said, like there's a lot of AI slop out there. I think it's pretty easy to tell when someone's just put something through GPT and like, it spat something out. I think the best value we can provide is that extra context around what's happening and why it's happening. And if you just feed it an article or feed it a single event, the AI just doesn't know what to do with it, or it can summarize what happened in that piece. But what we're able to do is, okay, we've been in this ecosystem now for like 3-4 years. The same people pop up again. Similar things happen. We can sort of like reflect on that and then add more context. And I think that, helps people sort of understand what's going on quite quickly.
Yeah, for sure. I know for a lot of people, and particularly a lot of founders that we work with, utilizing something like public relations can often feel out of reach because it can be quite expensive. What do you think the real benefits are of going to somebody who is a public relations specialist?
Great question. So now that I work in the world of PR, I think I've seen a different side of it. And I think there's maybe 2 ways to answer that. Like I think putting on my PR hat, like I think there is an element where you probably don't need a PR professional and it's probably up to you to sort of get the most out of it. At Encour, we often actually say no to clients. Like it's probably not a good fit. We've often had startups who have just done a pre-seed round come to us and say, we'd love to sort of present this to the world and like share this win with them. And we're a little bit like, ooh, just looking at how much you've raised, like we don't want to be a single percentage or 2% of like your capital raise in terms of like on spend on PR. Like that's probably not the best use of that cash you've got. Like, go build the product. But what we try and do is sort of say, this is how you structure a press release. Really think deeply about why are you doing this? Why do you want to be public? The common answers are usually like, well, we're going to fundraise again in the future. We sort of want to be on the radar of potential investors. We're obviously going to be growing our team a fair bit. We want to start hiring, so we want to be appealing to those people. And we're firm believers in like at Encour of like building your tribe. So if you put a stake in the ground and you stand for something, you're going to attract the right people or the people that you want to attract. So if you can craft a message, and I think founders who are building a startup sort of know exactly why they're doing it, but if they can explain that to the world and put that stake in the ground, they'll start attracting the right people, whether it's investors or new teammates. So I think for founders, if you can tell there's many ways to tell your story. It doesn't have to be just, going to the press and getting something published. You can go direct, like you probably have a social media channel. You can create your own blog. You can go on a podcast. Like there's plenty of ways to get your message out there. But I just think really deeply about why do you actually want to get that message out there and how you can structure that message to make sure you hit those business objectives.
For sure. I think that a really key element is often crafting that narrative and that story before going out and trying to acquire any press coverage in any way. How do you advise people to kind of start thinking about their story and give, the press something that is potentially newsworthy?
Yeah, so I'll answer that in two ways. So there's, I think the first point around like, what is your message? Your message probably has to be something familiar. So if you can associate your message with something people already care about, or put your message alongside something people already care about, half the work's already done for you. It's really hard to start selling someone or start trying to convince something or something that they've never heard of. So if you can sort of like reduce that message down into something really tangible that they probably already care about. For example, you might be building something in like the NDIS. And that's a very complex topic that a lot of people kind of know about but don't really know about. But if you can hone in on something that people can understand really, really quickly, I think that's a good way of sort of bridging that gap and getting people to sort of get on side really, really quickly. And then the second part of that is when you're engaging with the media, you sort of have to work out where the news stories currently are already and work out where the opportunities are within those news cycles. News and media in general basically cover conflict. Most of the publications that you sort of want to be in are focusing on conflict that happens in our world. And basically if you can sort of center yourself in the middle of that conflict and put your stake in the ground and tell the world what you're standing for and be relatable, and you can make sure that the journalist understands really quickly what your solution is in relation to the world and the news cycle. It's an easy way to sort of get into the press and convince them that you're sort of worthy of getting your opinion out there.
Yeah, we often talk to startups about that in particular. It's about actually recognizing the problem before you're presenting your solution. So you have to really be telling the world how big the problem is so that they can understand, hey, we do need a solution for that, and saying, I am the solution. I've created the solution for this, and this is how we go about it. It sounds really simple, but a lot of people don't really think in that way when presenting that kind of story.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you guys are always trying to convince potential investors of an opportunity. So, and the upside of that potential opportunity. So building the trust that the founder is the right person to solve that. And it's also a massive opportunity that they're chasing. I think that's a really quick way to sort of go, oh, we've hit the business objective of convincing people that they should invest in us.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I guess there's that other side of it, and it's the audience and the kind of audience that you want to be directing your story to. How do you find as a business your actual target addressable audience that you want to be getting your message out to, and which publications are going to be those that are hitting that audience? Yeah,
this is a funny one that comes up a bit. We often get approached and have conversations where founders want to be in very particular publications, and we sort of dive in quite deep of like, why is that? And they're very valid reasons, but sometimes it can literally boil down to, my parents are confused what I do. This is my opportunity to be in the AFR with a really nice photo, and they'll explain to the world what we're building, which I think is really fascinating. Like, it's a lonely journey, and sometimes that is like a really important thing for a founder to sort of prove to the world that they're actually doing something really meaningful. I think taking a bit of a step back, it's back to that business objectives question and why are we actually going ahead with this campaign. focusing on, what is that business objective and what publication or even what format of media will hit that objective best is sort of the good way to go about it. I think founders who are going through that, the phase of quickly growing their team and really interested in recruitment, we're learning that a lot of prospective recruits love to listen to podcasts where the founder sort of talks about their story and their mission as a great way of building that relationship already.
Okay.
So a lot of prospective recruits will listen to the founder talk as part of their due diligence on a startup to understand why they're actually building it. So if you're trying to convince people to join you on this mission, potentially doing some long form podcasts are a great way of building that relationship. I think a great example of that is the most recent US election. It was the podcast election. People got to know these presidents by what they said on podcasts and how they presented themselves, which I think is just a really good example of how effective it can be.
100%. I think that's why we always host investor webinars at Birchall, so that the public can get to ask questions in a public forum as well. So there's not really anywhere to hide, essentially. It's live, it's unfiltered. You're getting that inside look into the brain of the founder, and essentially that's the person that you're trusting with your money when you are investing. And I think that that's a huge part of it. Often founders say to us, can you make some investor phone calls to us, to people who've expressed interest in investing? And I say, no one wants to talk to me. They want to talk to you. That's so bizarre to me. And then you're also getting the voice of the investor when you're having those calls. How important do you think it is to really connect with your audience when convincing them to come on board and come along for the journey?
It's the whole reason you should probably be going out there with your message is connecting with that audience. Ultimately, any campaign in the public is I think should be to sort of fulfill some business objective, and that we're all humans and we all care about certain things. So building that connection, building that relationship is of the utmost importance. So we often find giving a little bit of vulnerability in podcasts and interviews is a great way of humanizing a founder. We have this framework we use. Hopefully I'm allowed to share this publicly, which is the character diamond. And it's a framework we find our founders that we work with love doing. And it's kind of this idea that, humans are very complex people. We sort of live inside our own heads and we have very complex ideas about who we are. But when you engage with someone who's in the media, or you see someone in the media, you're only seeing a refraction of that person. And that's potentially what that character diamond is, or that's what we're trying to portray. So we do quite a deep dive into the founder's backstory, what they care about, what they stand for, potentially some weaknesses that humanize them. And these sort of elements can create I think a caricature is has negative connotations to it, but it sort of creates this reflective lens that you can look through and sort of understand someone. So once you sort of put yourself out there and you sort of have the idea of who you want to be presenting to the world, people who sort of know you and have a positive opinion of you, you can say something potentially that's a bit, let's say, I'm super proud to be announcing, that we've just raised this cash. If someone already thinks that you're arrogant, they're a little bit oh, does this guy really need to have to say that? Or does this girl really need to have to do that? But if everyone knows that you're a little bit humble, it's pretty rare for you to be putting yourself out there. You're a very human person. You're very tangible. You sort of understand that this person's been through a bit of a journey, and they come out there and say, and you actually understand why they're building the thing they're building, because they've already told you how it connects to the real world. When they come out there and say, I'm so proud to, announce to the world we've just raised this much money to, build this mission, people are like, oh, hell yeah, good for that person. I want to get around them and support them. So I think if, we think about what is that personality that you're putting out into the world, and how do people relate with it? And if you can be very conscious about how you craft that, it can be a great way of building relationships really quickly and give you the benefit of the doubt when some things potentially don't go right, because people already have an opinion that you're a great person, and shit happens.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you just triggered me a little bit when you used the word humble, because my main ick on LinkedIn is when somebody does raise funds or something good happens to them, they're like, I am truly humbled. And all I want to write in the comments is, could you please look up humbled in the dictionary because you are using it in the wrong context.
Yeah.
And this is killing my soul.
Yeah.
And it's all the time. It's all the time. I mean, I think LinkedIn is such a good platform in a lot of ways, but in other ways, I feel like we're getting to this point where people are sharing more and more hyper-personal content, which I don't know how I feel about. How do you feel about that?
I think there's a difference between like hyper-personal and like too much information and authentic.
Yeah.
We're seeing that, like I think this comes from the sort of most recent like social media revolution and the sort of world of short form video. The content that connects with people is like quite raw and quite authentic. It's not super high production value stuff. It's potentially just someone with their iPhone, filming a selfie video telling a story. So like the hyper personal stuff can just be like, it's too much information. I don't really get this. But if someone's out there telling something that's really authentic, they've got genuine reasons to be sharing this information, and they're doing it in a genuine way that sort of reflects positively on them and the business that they're building. I think it can be like a super useful tool. It's one of the things that we're really leaning into at Encour is, how can we create media that's authentic, that involves the founders getting their message out there, on their own channel on LinkedIn. And it's been awesome so far.
Yeah. It's interesting. Actually, it makes me think of this founder that we have worked with a bunch of times. She's super clever and she's done, I think, 5 or 6 raises with us now for 2 different companies. And one of the companies is medicinal honey. And it was really controversial when she launched this medicinal honey. I don't even know if I'm allowed to say this on my own podcast, but it was
say it. Be authentic.
Oh gosh, let's not get me cancelled. But basically, the honey was to treat genital issues.
Okay.
And she came on and founded a camera piece just on her iPhone, and she was talking about issues that she had previously had, and a lot of people were really put off. And then a lot of people really lent in, and they were like, oh, she's actually experienced this problem that she's now trying to address.
Yeah.
And it connected with people.
Exactly. Because she was being authentic and she was sort of showing this like she humanized herself by showing something that is a little bit like maybe awkward or whatever. But I think that's a great example of like putting a stake in the ground. Like, here's a slightly taboo issue that a lot of people potentially have that don't talk about it. I'll be the person that talks about it. Yeah. And sure, like it put people off, but like, let's be honest, they were probably people who were never going to invest in it or buy the product.
100%.
But then she found her tribe and they got around her. Like you said, they lent in.
Yeah, I think you're taking a bit of a risk at the end of the day. You're risking the fact that not everybody is like-minded and not everybody's going to be a supporter. And I think we see that time and time again promoting investment campaigns on the virtual platform is you do have a lot of naysayers and negativity. How do you recommend people deal with negativity that is in a public forum and that's directly related to them putting themselves and their businesses out there?
Yeah, I think when you're going public with a message, you probably have to do a bit of work previously around, who are the potential people that might be angry about this message going out there, who's going to be giving fair criticism to your messages, and how can you sort of negate that proactively? So when you craft that message, how can you sort of get ahead of them and, make sure that you're sort of leaving some crumbs that sort of answer their questions basically before your message goes live. And then you have to think as well, like, okay, people who aren't fair-minded, what are they saying? Who are the haters out there, and how are they going to be talking about your message and replying to you in the comments? Those people are probably relatively, angry about the world, like who needs to be giving negative messages in the comments and being sort of public with that outrage. But it happens, right? So if you can start thinking ahead of the curve of like, okay, like maybe that's a very specific example, but like, what will people be pissed off about in this situation, and what are their common arguments when they come to the table? And if you're a founder and you've been thinking about this idea for a while, you've probably spoken to quite a few people and heard those comments previously. So you can almost get ahead of the ball game and be ready with replies when they come. I think it's a great point to sort of, make sure you control that narrative, make sure you answer those comments, reply to them in, a respectful, but also like a back yourself in and share those answers. I think in the sense of like when we think about tribes, I think it's interesting to think about like go back maybe 10 years to the world of, or maybe like 5 years actually, to the world of like Facebook marketing and the world of like cohorts. And I think this is like an idea I've sort of taken from like the world of e-commerce, but there's plenty of different cohorts in the world and people can belong to multiple cohorts at the same time. But your tribe is a cohort and then the curmudgeons are also a different cohort.
Right.
And you're trying to find your cohort and get your message effectively to them because they're the people that you're trying to, bring in and sell your product to or invest in you or whatever it is. And there's just plenty of other people that don't give a shit or potentially don't like what you're doing.
Yeah.
And in the land of startups, like inevitably you're disrupting someone and they're not going to be happy about it, but that's the game we're in. So just get used to it. So that's just how you have to think of it. Just think of it as a cohort that is, they're there, but they're not really for you. So focus on the people that matter.
That's a really fascinating take. And I'd never considered it. It's interesting. We see companies come in all the time that I think to myself, surely no one could possibly have anything negative to say. There's always something. It'll be an incredible company that are tackling sustainability in a really meaningful way, and someone will have something negative. We've got a great company on the platform at the moment called Shark Stop, and they're shark-resistant wetsuits. And I was like, brilliant. I'm afraid of sharks. How good's that? And then people are there saying, oh, but if it bit you, it might break a bone or like it could do something like that. And you're like, oh my goodness, like, can you do anything right? And I think frustration can get the better of founders, I'm sure.
Yeah, but that's, I think, a really interesting point of maybe that messaging can be clearer about like how does that piece of wetsuit like actually protect you from the sharks? And in that sort of like education piece, we don't harm the sharks, or I don't know the product, I don't know how it works, but making sure you're already sort of getting in front of that common conception of like, oh, this might hurt the shark, and I like sharks. Sharks should be left alone. You shouldn't even be in their ecosystem in the first place. Like I'm sure that's probably another pretty common one. But just being clear with like, oh no, this is actually, it doesn't hurt them. It's just, something that, we have to have divers for particular different reasons. And this is just a way to make sure that they can do what they need to do safely without injuring marine life.
So it's like you're going into a debate, but you've already considered the rebuttal that your opposition might have before you even go in, and you're answering those questions ahead of time. So hopefully the naysayers can't really come for you.
Definitely. And for a startup that's going through like, for founders who are probably too early for like professional PR support, but have spoken to investors, like you're going to get a lot of no's in that process. And some of those investors are going to raise the same arguments that people in public will raise against your business. So just make note of it and be like, okay, these are like reasons why people don't believe in us or don't, agree with our product or how we're going about solving it. But they're a good way to sort of like crowdsource, when you do go live and when you do start doing what you're doing, how people are going to respond to you.
For sure. And in getting your message out there and going to the press, is there seasonality in that? And are there particular times of year that particular industries might get more coverage, things like that?
I wouldn't say seasonality. I mean, like there's definitely quiet periods in the world of news, like the Christmas sort of like early New Year's period. Like I think a lot of people just, the financial services world of Australia definitely shuts down in that period, and that includes the media. So I think that's just like generally a pretty quiet spot. That being said, take advantage of it because journalists need to produce some content. So if you can sort of get a story to them, do a lot of the lift for them because they're running on a skeleton crew, like the other PR people or the other startups, they're on holiday, so you can take advantage of that quiet period. I think it's like this. I mean, when I'm on holiday, like I still refresh the news or get the newspaper. It's actually the time where I have a lot of time to read. So it's a really good opportunity to try get a story out there because people have more time to engage with content. I wouldn't say like generally there's like seasonality, but there are news cycles. So just identifying where news cycles are appearing and where they're ending, or what someone's already said in a news cycle and how you can potentially add to their argument or counter their argument. That's probably how you should be thinking about it.
Interesting. And I think probably for some businesses in particular, they need to seize an opportunity when there's news about something in particular. I know I interviewed somebody earlier today and they're a drinks brand. So for them, summer is everything and going into winter is quiet time. So they kind of only want to be talking about their story around the summer and spring months. Is it the same that all businesses should be thinking about when they are wanting to do any kind of press? Is it like, is that time relevant for their particular industry?
Yeah, I think that goes back to the business objective side of things. So like if you're a drinks business and you're trying to get PR to get sales, then, you know, think about when your biggest sales like period is and then try and get a story that relates to that. I think in the financial services world, like end of financial year is very important. That's potentially when people are sort of reassessing their products and how they do things, or when they're reconsidering like potential services. So being front of mind in that period is really important. So I think it's probably not, you're probably not thinking, oh, when will the press cover a story like this? Like they cover news cycles and want to be relevant in those news cycles, but you've got to think, when should we be relevant to our customers, because they have, you know, potential buying cycles that we can jump in on.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously you see a lot of stories come through about businesses that are hot, businesses that are getting funded. What industries do you see are trending at the moment?
I think that's an interesting one, because at Overnight Success, like we do a lot of work with startup data in particular. And I think there's quite a few businesses that are doing cool things that aren't public, let's say, or not spoken about in the media. So I think we have a bit of a, let's say in our, you know, public fascination, I think Australia is very strong or is very aware of like how successful we are in, you know, B2B SaaS and the growing trends in AI. Like I don't think it's revolutionary for me to say that there's definitely a trend in AI. But there's definitely undercurrents and some cool startups doing other things in potentially, I wouldn't say less newsworthy, but just industries that just don't get covered as much. Like there's so much happening in medtech, so much happening in biotech. Quantum is a massive thing in Australia. Not many people talk about it because frankly, like those last three topics are just quite complex and like just a lot. Whereas B2B SaaS is, you know, relatively tangible. We all understand businesses and how those startups can fit into business solutions. So yeah, I think it's an interesting one. It's sort of like, do those startups do they need press to be successful? Yes, maybe not. So they potentially don't pursue it.
Right. No, I think it's interesting because we see a lot of industries trend in the fundraising sector for virtual. One year it was all breweries. I seldom will see a brewery come across the platform, and then medicinal marijuana was massive for a while. And whilst it's still relatively prominent, the one thing we've seen every year is food and beverage. That's always been super popular, and followed by sustainability coming in there. But I think more technology and hardware technology businesses are starting to come into their own. And last year in particular was busy in that sector for us because VCs were just not giving out any money. Are you thinking that this year is going to be a bit of a tide turn?
I think the word of the year is cautious optimism is like.
Cautious optimism.
Yeah, like I think people are sort of saying like, oh no, we're thinking it's looking pretty good. But then, you know, when it comes to actually putting money out there, it's probably not flying out the door.
Yeah, right.
I think we're a long way off returning to sort of like the 2021, 2022.
Good times.
You know, the good times, the crazy times. I think what people should be focusing on, and maybe this is different in the world of crowdfunding, like let me know, but I think in the world of venture, it's potentially not the amount of cash that's being deployed and the valuations that are, you know, being invested in, but potentially the deal terms.
Okay.
So I think there were some pretty crazy deal terms that got sort of publicized at the sort of earlier last year in 2024, where liquid preferences were like 4 times or 8 times, which just makes it extremely hard. Like it's just the investors being very protective of the money that they're deploying in like a very simple way. But it just means that if you're the founder of that business, to get an exit that's probably meaningful for you, it's going to be very challenging because you just have to return, you know, X, 4X, 8X, whatever the money that the VC put in.
Right.
in the most recent cut through venture report, there was like a stat that I'm hopefully going to write an article about at some point, but a lot of investors were saying deal terms are probably, I think it was, don't quote me, but I think it was like something like 60% saying deal terms are probably not going to change in 2025. And then there was roughly like 20% or so saying deal terms are actually going to get better for investors in 2025.
Okay.
Which to me sort of goes, oh, maybe founders should be really, really thinking deeply about like not just the cash, but the terms of the cash that it comes with, and really taking a long-term horizon look of, okay, like what do these deal terms mean for me in 5-10 years? Or if shit hits the fan, like what does it mean for me in the worst case scenario as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something I discuss with founders a lot of the time is the consideration of their valuation, how it's going to age over time, in particular if they're going to need to raise capital again in the future and how far away that is.
Yep.
Because often you'll see through equity crowdfunding, there is a reputation that valuations are overinflated.
Yep.
And because at the end of the day, the terms of the offer are being set by founders who naturally are going to value their business higher than, say, a VC who is looking at getting some great terms.
Yeah, sure.
So I think that that's an art form in and of itself, is trying to come to a fair valuation. Do you think that that means this year valuations are going to drop back to more of a reasonable level?
I think they've been relatively reasonable. I wouldn't say they've been like crazy last year. I think the valuations are probably going to remain relatively like respectable or like, you know, fine. I think it's that deal term sort of thing that is definitely going to come into it. On the notion of like people taking a valuation that's probably a little bit crazy, or maybe doesn't make sense, or like thinking long term about their valuation. I think if you're a company that needs cash to grow and you're not looking in the next like 2 to 3 years to be profitable with that money you've just raised, and you sort of know that at some point you're going to raise money in the future again, which is completely normal, and that's what happens in the world of startups. Be very conscious that you're telling a story, and be very conscious that the people who back you early on are probably like some of your most fanatical supporters. And if you're telling them that they need to invest at this much, and then you sort of know that it's a pretty optimistic valuation, and in 2 years' time, you're going to have to be something pretty crazy to double that valuation. And when you go out to those investors and say, hey, we'd love to raise some money for these reasons, and they ask you what the valuation is, and you've now got an investor in saying, actually, no, we're not going to invest at that valuation because it doesn't really square for us. You have to go back to your fanatics and say, oh yeah, actually, you need to give us more money, but the valuation is less than what it was last time. Like that's a pretty shitty thing to do to your most like supportive and probably like biggest supporters of your product as well. So I think make sure you're sort of telling that story or making the most of that story and that progress and bringing everyone along on the way in a really respectable and I think positive experience, because they're your biggest supporters, and I think they should share the upside for backing you.
100%. I couldn't have explained that better myself, as I think that a lot of the time people don't consider investors and how that investor trust can be broken or damaged in the future because you haven't been transparent and you're overly optimistic. I think that's the nicest way to put it. And it can be so problematic for your business moving forward. How often do you see that happen for businesses, and how detrimental can it be for their future?
I think it makes it harder. I think it makes it like much harder because you've potentially lost your biggest supporters by doing it, or you've pissed them off, or you have to then reconvince them to come back to the table and have that conversation. But if you're coming up to them and saying, oh, by the way, like we've doubled valuation, we're growing just as much as we said we were, or we're growing, fairly well as well. Would you like to double down or come along or whatever? It's much easier for that investor to do that. And I think that's the same for crowdfunding as it is for angel investors, as it is for institutional investors and VCs. They want to be, made whole on their investment, and they want you to sort of, I think they should, or you should as a founder want to treat them with respect along the way as well. I think when you go public as well with campaigns, be conscious of the numbers that you share with journalists and with the media, or just in general, because the internet is forever in some ways. And when people like look you up and read the stories about you when they're doing due diligence and they see that there's a growth number from 3 years ago that was, pretty high, and now you're presenting a growth numbers that's quite different, and maybe potentially lower, they'll be a bit like, oh, what's happened to the business? Why aren't you growing like you were growing last time? Or you were making X amount of revenue then and you're making less now, but now you're coming to me for more money at a high valuation. Like, what the hell?
Yeah.
So I think you have to be very conscious of that story that you're telling, and that, circumstances change, and you might want to, despite feeling $1 million right now and feeling amazing and wanting to share the good news with the world, be conscious that you might have to go out there again and ask for money from other people too.
For sure. So for early stage startups, I think that the main problem when they really want to grow is they're juggling so many priorities. It's, are we able to actually fund our growth? Are we able to fund it sustainably? Are we amplifying our voice enough? Are we staying true to our initial investors? What are the main steps that they need to take to get their priority right in the very beginning? It's a very
loaded question, and I'm someone who tries to not profess, generalist advice into the world of startups. It's why I've sort of lasted so long. I mean, I think you actually had a very I won't say who the founder was, but I had a very interesting conversation with the founder, and I think I'll use his advice as a good jumping off point. But he was sort of saying that, let's say in the world of pre-seed, you've raised $1.5 million and you've got this idea, and you've got this idea of how you're building and how you're going to market it and distribute it and sell it, and you built this thing and it's kind of working, but you sort of made some sales. You've got some people who use your product, but you're not shooting the lights out. And when you go to investors again, that they kind of say, oh look, this didn't really work, did it? And you spent $1 million, you've still got 500 grand left, and you're a little bit like, well, I don't think our thesis is right. Like, I don't think this is the product that we should be doing. His advice was take that remaining $500,000, burn that business, and just do something else. Like just pivot completely, try a new thesis and restart. And the idea being that like in the world of VC, like it's not about, marginal returns, and it's not about like returning, it's not about like growing your business 1 or 2%. Like you're trying to like return someone's fund. So VCs, if they're sort of thinking about it the right way, they should actually respect that and want you to try something completely different, not double down on something that's not working, but then try and like rewrite the rules and start a new product. And I think there's a lot of stories of big companies who've pivoted from their original idea and done this. But I think it's like really interesting to sort of think about like why you're actually building a business, and for the investors, like you should be trying to return their fund or 10x their money or 4x their money, whatever it is. And if the growth isn't there, maybe you should just think about like restarting and from scratch.
That is really fascinating advice. I feel like this has been...
I'll tell you who it was after,
okay.
And you'll be...
I can't wait.
You'll laugh.
I promise I'll keep it to myself. Or will I? Thank you so much for coming on. I feel like this has been an unbelievable masterclass in how to present your story as a founder, how to amplify your voice and the voice of your company. It's been absolutely brilliant chatting to you. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.